Good morning. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I'm so very grateful that we are all here. This is your daily Catalyst Astrology report for July 8th, 2020. All right, let's get right into today. Good morning to everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. This is going to encompass today and the transits moving into tomorrow, so you can kind of have an idea of what to expect for today, moving into tomorrow. Yeah, just incredible times that we're living in. So we do have our moon currently at 27 to 28 degrees Aquarius. Our sun is in Cancer. Asteroid Vesta, not pictured here, also conjunct the sun in Cancer. We have Mercury retrograde, who will be stationing direct on the 12th of July. And so coming into its final degree of retrograde, at least in this cycle, and we'll be slowing down. The North Node still in the last degree of Gemini, also Venus in Gemini, Uranus in Taurus, Mars and Chiron in Aries, soon to be conjunct as well. So that's something to pay attention to. We can talk a little bit more about that as it gets closer. And Neptune retrograde in Pisces, and then we have our Capricorn lineup right here. So we also have Ceres, asteroid Ceres in Pisces, 13 degrees Pisces, and now retrograde as well. I talked about that yesterday. And Pallas Athena, also 23 degrees Capricorn retrograde. So she's joining this little cohort over here. Pallas Athena is the goddess of wisdom and strategy. So she is joining Pluto, the Lord of Death, Jupiter, the leadership, and then Saturn, the Lord of Karma, all in this Capricorn area. So, looking at the wisdom and the strategy also going along with this total matrix rewrite that is represented by all of this stuff over here. So the one thing that you can see, everything is really situated on the side of the chart, especially now that the moon is here on this side of the chart. So we're going to have a lot of emotional connection and identification with all of these energies here as the moon passes through all of these areas, the end of the zodiac, especially moving into Pisces today, and then moving through all of the individualized aspects. So the moon coming into Pisces today is, we're going to have, this is the last space of the collective consciousness. And with Pisces, it's the collective unconsciousness, the Akashic records. It is the vibrational field from which everything comes and will ever come and has always been, right? So everything that you can imagine, this is why Pisces in the 12th house is about imagination and delusion and illusion, because anything that you can imagine or think up or consider or dream about it's all in Pisces, and it's all a possibility, especially if you give it your energy and your attention. So, but it also represents the collective from an emotional, spiritual perspective. It is really the emotional and spiritual linking of the collective, whereas Aquarius is much more of the intellectualized, mental capacity to identify the collective from knowledge and from knowing and from applying that, of course, but this will become a much more emotional, spiritual experience as the moon moves into Pisces. So today, one of the major transits is Mars in Aries squaring Mercury retrograde in Cancer. This degree that we find Mars at is now moving into this position where the internal potential of creation that is part of the Aries archetype, all of the cardinal fire, the directional fire in order to create, is still encompassed in the seed. And this is the moment where in Aries that a person, the subjective experience, the ego consciousness, is able to realize that it's possible to live in two realms at once, specifically the spiritual and the material. And with Mars here, there's certainly an ambitious drive and a lot of courage in order to fill in both of those spaces, and certainly maybe a little bit too confident and maybe a little bit too ambitious when it comes to that. But in some ways, we also need that confidence and we need that courage in order to balance these polarities of living within these two realms, because that is very reminiscent and explains really well what we're going through in this awakening process, this ascension process on this planet, is that we are in fact living in two different realms. And a lot of people are moving back and forth. They're kind of flowing back and forth. They may have one foot in one dimension, one foot in the other. And this is kind of this moment where we identify that we're perfectly capable and have all the resources in order to do this. And right now, it's we could use a little bit of this courage. Now, the square you can see right here to Mercury retrograde in Cancer, we've, you know, in our minds, in communication, in short-term travel, in the empirical data, we have been considering all of this and all of these options, all of these thoughts, all of these potentials from our, you know, from our minds, from our mental perspective, from our ability to engage with raw data. But Mercury going retrograde in Cancer, about protection and about boundaries and emotional security and home and land of origin, and very tribal, right? Tribalism, the small group that you come from, that you identify with, that allows you to feel emotionally vulnerable within that container of family or group. And this is where we get our personal power, right? This is the cord to the core of the earth. So we've been reconsidering the data. We've been going back over the contracts. We have been renegotiating within ourselves and in our minds what this all means to us. In the square, there's a lot of creative imagination that is at this degree. There is an identification of elemental forces, natural forces that are part of feeling emotionally vulnerable and feeling emotionally secure. It allows one to be more imaginative and to see the more magical aspects of the natural world, so to speak, and to dance under the moonlight, right? There's this sense of feeling safe and secure enough in order to let that part of ourselves out. And so while we're like reconsidering that, and, you know, are we feeling safe enough? Are we even able to engage this creative imagination? And are we situated in the container that allows us to be free, you know, and to be sovereign and to be secure emotionally, no matter what is going on? You know, the root, how strong are your roots? And do they allow for, you know, an ability to consider the unseen forces that are at play and not feel not give yourself over to them, but to be them in some ways. Mars, it's, you know, Aries and Cancer, you know, are naturally square to each other, because Aries is about the subjective ego experience and Cancer is about the family and the home. And so we're, you know, the square is like, do we, you know, charge forward with our own subjective experience of being able to do this? How does that fit? Well, it doesn't, because it's a square. So how are these trajectories that are going in completely different directions, when they finally meet, what does that feel like? Does it feel like we can, well, with Mars and Aries, it definitely, that's where the power is. And so it's really going to, it's moving at quite the speed. And so where's the most damage going to be when these two energies T-bone each other, right? Well, Mars is moving pretty quickly and is just gaining momentum as Mars moves through its home territory of Aries. I think this is going to really challenge our subjective experience of being our own sovereign being, right? In terms of what we can, how we can direct our own creative potential, and in connection to the way that we communicate, the information that we have, the way that we conceptualize. That is a big thing about Mercury in the mind. Conceptualize, how we conceptualize home, family, security. And if we are able to conceptualize them enough to be secure enough to consider the magical elements, because that's not what's happening with Mars and Aries. It is just go. I'm just going. So there is a benefit here, obviously, to having this confidence and courage, especially to live within these two worlds at once, the material and the spiritual. But at the same time, especially because Mercury is soon going to go direct, and the moon, when she moves into Pisces, which she really does enjoy being in Pisces. There's definitely a connection here with the moon in Pisces. Once she moves into Pisces at the end of today into tomorrow morning, then she will trine Mercury. And so there'll be a sense of community responsibility from an emotional standpoint that will very much support where Mercury is. And when it moves into 5 to 6 degrees of Cancer, it's feathering the nest. It is creating the actual container and expanding it and reinforcing it in order to make space for the new life that's going to come in. And there's a sense of responsibility that I think that we'll all individually feel for not only ourselves, but the collective. And so Mars is only thinking about Mars. And, a lot of times that's important. Now, when Mars comes to conjunct Chiron in a couple of days, that is going to really, again, activate how much Mars is able to help us individually manage this Chiron wound. And then it really will become about us individually, each individual person's victimhood, victim status, how they deal with their wounded healer, and their own subjective wounding of self. We have to be very careful. And make sure that this is balanced, so that it doesn't overtake where Mercury in Cancer is, because this is important energy, especially because the North Node is so close to Cancer still. The moon is then going to come to trine. You can see right here, trining the North Node. So the moon at the last degree of Aquarius is going to trine the North Node in the last degree of Gemini. So this is kind of that last injection in some ways of the mental energy into this situation, especially with the last degree of Aquarius, because it's kind of coming to a realization of the totality of everything, and it's being able to see the individual and the autonomous being within the collective and seeing them at the same time. See, there seems to be some themes here about living in two worlds, or being able to be in two places and recognize them. So think about this last degree of Aquarius as in the same way that we think about light from a physics point of view. Light travels in waves, and it also exists as particles, and it really just depends on your perspective which one you're looking at, but they do exist simultaneously. Light exists as particles and travels in waves, and it's not just one or the other. They both function together as the same entity, which is light, right? And that's the same thing with this last degree of Aquarius, that you recognize that humanity is made up of individuals, and is also those individuals make up a collective experience. And those two things you can't separate them. They exist in order to create a collective experience. Mars in Aries is going to focus more about each of us individually as an ego consciousness, as a subjective experience, living in these two realms at once, and pushing. That's the other thing, pushing. And we have to maybe use that energy to balance more than be on the warpath, because that's just Mars and Aries. That's exactly what that is. So having this last degree of Aquarius trining the North Node, our collective karma, our collective destiny, where we are headed collectively, in Gemini, which is all about the empirical data, all of the information that is available to us without any judgment on it, without any analysis even. It is just raw data and our ability to communicate it. because once the moon moves into Pisces today, it becomes a different emotional experience, a different intuitive experience. And so this moment here of this trine, I think, is really important for our intuitive experience, our intuition, our internalized landscape, to recognize that particles and waves, same time, same entity, same construct, which is light, that exists at the same time and has to do with your perspective. Because once we go into Pisces, it all dissolves into one amorphous, boundaryless ocean, right? It is the primordial soup of the collective unconscious, and things become a lot more dreamy and less boundary and less focused, very dispersed, but also very sweet and very imaginative and very loving and compassionate. That's the beauty of a moon in Pisces, is the compassion and the forgiveness and the ability to internalize that experience. And then when she comes, like I said, to trine Mercury at the degree that Mercury will station direct, feathering the nest, we have a real beautiful opportunity to emotionally align with that, using the data that we're collecting, using our minds, using the information that we are taking in and putting out, Mercury, right? Using that in order to feather the nest, to reinforce the container, in order to be more, in order to accommodate a new beginning, new life. And it'll be from a place of emotional responsibility to the collective, a spiritual responsibility to the collective that we are going to feel very directly, as opposed to Aquarius, which is using that emotional energy to open the third eye and have a knowing of it, and being light. But this is more about being dissolved into the whole and feeling everything that everybody else feels, and taking some responsibility for that too. I think that's going to be really nice. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not going to get confusing, especially the moon is going to conjunct Ceres in retrograde Ceres tomorrow. And then within Friday is going to come and going to conjunct Neptune retrograde. Things will get confusing. They will get more dispersed. They will emotionally become, this is the empath realm here, especially with the moon. Like, we're going to start feeling all the feels that aren't just ours, which is interesting here again with Mars in Aries, because it is, it's all about just what action Mars is taking. There's no feeling, there's no consideration of, there's no grounding here. It's all cardinal fire, action potential with Aries. So leading into this square today will really help kind of temper that just a little bit and get the most out of it, as opposed to being taken over entirely by it. One other thing that I want to point out is that Juno, we talked about Juno yesterday, asteroid Juno. She was Juno, or Hera, right? The wife of Zeus. It represents commitment and loyalty, right? And betrayal. That's also part of the archetype, is the betrayal part. It's not all just the awesome parts of Juno. Like, all of these deities that these planets, all the archetypes that are connected to astrology, especially tropical and Western astrology, they, there was no illusion with the Greeks and the Romans about these deities and these archetypes that they identified. It was they embodied the same challenges and the same spectrum of experience that humanity does. And this was their way of being able to communicate these archetypes of human experience through these symbols of gods and goddesses. So loyalty and commitment, but also betrayal, because betrayal doesn't come unless you have a commitment and some loyalty, and then you work against that in some way. So that's where betrayal comes with this, which is trust. And there's trust in a commitment, and there's trust when you have loyalty or you express loyalty. Well, Juno is in Libra, which is all the way over here. So she's kind of the only balance point in Libra, which is literally about balance. and is cardinal air over here. And so she is actually quincunx today to Uranus and Taurus, which is quincunx. What is that? 150-degree angle and inconjunct. It is the square peg in a round hole. There's nothing about an inconjunct that fits. It requires a complete readjustment in order to make sense out of it. You can't, I mean, you can continue to try to shove that square peg into the round hole, but it's not going to go no matter how many times that you do it. And Libra is cardinal air, right? It's about knowledge, but it's about the instruction as well. Not education, but instruction, the movement of knowledge, right? That is cardinal. There's action associated to it. So moving into the next decan of Libra, you know, the next 10 degrees, it's this degree specifically is a professor peering over their glasses at the students, right? There is the professor as an archetype is somebody who's spent their life compiling this information and learning how to instruct their own students and have achieved a level of mastery. But in Libra, it's all about the instruction part, being able to communicate and disseminate the knowledge, right? And then understanding comes later with Sagittarius. Libra is just about the balance of the information and the instruction, the movement, the movement of the knowledge. And then there's a real challenge for the professor because their nose is in their books, right? They have all the knowledge, they have all of the experience with the knowledge and have had lots and lots of time to be able to oh my gosh, I can really feel this. There's a lot of time that has been spent with this knowledge for the professor, right? But they are now having to instruct their students who have not spent years and decades and are not professors, right? They're students. And so sometimes in this particular degree, the professor is having to look up from the knowledge, from the information that they are attempting to instruct, you know, and to pass on to the students, and to just look at their students as human beings in order to figure out how best to instruct and to pass on this knowledge that has been accumulated over so much time for the professor, right? They spent their entire life accumulating and working with this knowledge. And now they are in a position where they have students that don't know anything about it. And they still have to acknowledge those students as humans and meet them where they are. And that's the challenge. Now, it does not fit where Uranus is with Taurus, the woman watering the garden and taking some sort of personal responsibility for the growth of and the cultivation of the natural world, right? That's not what's happening over here. So with Libra and with Juno, again, it's about our responsibility, our commitment, our loyalty to the leadership, and to, when we talk about a professor and knowledge, we're talking about a loyalty to the higher realm of information and knowledge. There's a commitment there. And the struggle and the inconjunct comes because there is still a commitment to pass on this knowledge, right? That is the commitment that has been made. Yet Uranus it's about cultivation, where we are talking about the awakening process within the physical realm of Earth, material, natural presence, right? Cultivation, giving the plants what they need to grow, but not doing anything else. And I think it's okay, and it's important that people who maybe have accumulated a lot of knowledge and feel responsible and feel committed. It is their responsibility and their commitment to pass this knowledge on, and even meet people where they are. It's more, it makes more sense, and it is providing an we'll need to provide ourselves with an adjustment, because Uranus is just like, you just have to water the flowers. and and nature will do the rest. But there is a sense of this is my garden, right? This is something that I am cultivating as well with Taurus. It is about what I own, because the second house is what you own, what you value, what's valuable to you. And so there is also a sense of this is my space. And I'm going to water this garden and grow it, and I'm taking personal responsibility for it. But it is my garden. Whereas the professor has to come to terms with the fact that these students are still people. And it does kind of fit in really well with this last degree of Aquarius, actually, where we're acknowledging that the individual and the collective are one and the same, and that the individual makes up the collective, and you can't really separate them. And that is the secret initiatory knowledge that you get at the end of Aquarius, and allows you then to be able, and that allows you as a person or as an entity or whatever to actually let's see dissolve yourself, because you understand, and now you know, like the deeper knowledge about how the universe works through Aquarius. And then you can kind of like trust and surrender to the Pisces process of just dissolving into everything. And that's very much the Hanged Man as well. But the adjustment here, I think, is really interesting, and it's so powerful over here with Uranus and in Taurus, because it is the path of the awakening, and it's very disruptive and very futuristic and revolutionary. And it's so interesting that the most revolutionary thing you can do is maybe just go and water your garden, right? Your little plot of life that you are in charge of, right? Your second house, what you own, your assets. It's more on the path of awakening to focus on that and watering your garden, as opposed to taking the responsibility and the commitment to be to try to pass on this knowledge to your students. And the challenge comes when you have to, realize that they are also human beings that have not had their nose in the book for decades, and the struggle with being able to bridge that. Again, these two realms that you have to simultaneously be in is a big theme right now. And I think that if we are not able to manage that very well, it can really drain our energy. So back to Uranus, watering the woman watering the garden. It's really some of the best advice that I could especially give to myself. It's just like, just focus on what's right in front of you, cultivating the natural, beautiful aspects of the world around you. And this is going to be the direct link to the awakening process. So that's the daily catalyst for today. We're going to be, like I said, Moon is moving into Pisces, and we'll be trining Mercury retrograde in the degree that Mercury will now go direct on the 12th. And so we'll talk more about what that all means tomorrow. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for being here. Everything you need is in the description box below. Reach out if you're interested in a personal reading. And there is a donation link to PayPal if you feel so called to donate to this work. I would really, I would appreciate it. It's not necessary. That's why it's a donation. This is my heart's work. And so I appreciate just being able to share this with you. So take care of yourselves. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.